Good evening, everybody. I hope you all were able to enjoy some time outside today. It was beautiful. My name is Jessica Ogans, and I'm the Director of Mental Health Services at Ivymount, in addition to our occupational therapy, physical therapy, and adapted PE team. I want to thank you for joining us this evening for this important topic on self-care and self-compassion during the time of COVID, presented by Michael Stromberg, our mental health lead. This session is being recorded, so if you would not like your picture to be shown, please turn off your video. Please also keep yourselves muted during the presentation, but feel free to type in comments and questions in the chat box. We did not receive any questions prior to this presentation, so any questions that do come up, we will get back to you with responses. Without further ado, I'd like to present Michael Stromberg.
Hi, everyone. As Jess said, I'm Mike Stromberg. It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure to be with you tonight. And I just want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I think this is a, this is a topic near and dear to my heart. And I think it's now, self-care and self-compassion is needed now more than ever. So, you can give yourself a pat on the back for coming out. I know you guys are all really busy with so much going on right now. So again, thank you for coming out. And I am going to go ahead and jump right in. So a little bit about myself. I'm the mental health lead at Ivymount. I've worked with youth and families of youth with autism for 10 plus years, starting back as a one-to-one aide, and then going back to school to get my master's in social work. And then I've worked in school for about 7 years. I've also done some other work with families outside of school social work, running support groups for families, and a role as a family navigator with a local autism society. On a personal note, I would consider myself a struggling parent of a 3.5-year-old and a 20-month-old. It's definitely been, COVID has really thrown a wrench, so to speak, into kind of my parenting and kind of some issues going on there. I'm not going to talk too much about my kids, but you might hear a story or two in terms of some self-compassion that I've had to practice myself. And then, I come from this perspective from a kind of initially from I would say a begrudging perspective. I consider myself an initial self-care and self-compassion skeptic. I really thought that initially when I first, anytime I heard of self-care, I would kind of just roll my eyes, and self-compassion, like I don't need to do any of that stuff. Like it's not for me. And I've definitely done a complete 180 about it, and I've seen the importance of it both from a personal standpoint, from a professional standpoint in working with families with children with autism. So I'm excited to share this presentation with you. So the agenda real quick, we're going to talk about self-care. We're going to get into acceptance and what that means and what that term means. We're going to talk about the difference between pain and suffering. Then we're going to go into self-compassion, and then you'll get a chance to give some feedback about the presentation. All right, so here we are. We are still dealing with coronavirus, in case you weren't aware of that. It's if you told me in March that we would be still dealing with this at the end of September into October with no end in sight, I definitely would not believe you. So it's kind of, to me, it's a surreal experience that we're all going through, and it's we're still here. So this presentation is to try and make sense of what's going on in terms of just our own mental health and how we treat ourselves, and ways we can deal with the challenges inherent with coronavirus. In thinking about COVID and how it relates, I think to you all, it affects, I think, people and families pretty significantly across the board. But I think in particular, special needs children and their families are incredibly hit hard by the realities of COVID. I know I don't need to go into this in too much detail. You guys are living this. But the fact that your kids are home all day, they're missing out on school. You're juggling so many different things right now. There's a lack of services, or the services may not be as robust as they were before COVID. There's health anxiety of ourselves, our loved ones, distance learning. Again, the work responsibilities, and then you have to be your child's teacher, social worker, speech language pathologist, occupational therapist, and on top of so many other things. So again, I know, so in dealing with all of these challenges and all these stressors that come up, I think I think you probably have heard, oh, you just need to practice self-care. Practice self-care and all your problems will go away. So if you can just sleep more, eat healthy, exercise more, take a bath, be positive, meditate and smile, everything will be all right. And I could conclude my presentation there, but I think there's a lot more to self-care than that. So some of those are obviously very important. We want to try and exercise when we can and get enough sleep and eat healthy. That's all extremely important. But I think, there's, when I'm struggling and with something, and I hear, oh, you just need to practice self-care, it kind of falls flat, and it's not always very meaningful to me. So what I'd like to do tonight is try and reframe how we think of self-care. And self-care is more of controlling how we respond to challenges, stressors, and unwanted events. So here I'm talking about kind of how our thoughts and feelings, those internal cognitive, the way we think about things, our internal processes, and how that relates to how we care for ourselves and how we treat ourselves. I think there's a common misperception that I don't have time for self-care. It requires too much. It's too much to do. Too many resources. What I want to get at is that we're talking about things you can do in the moment. Minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, to practice self-care in regards to how we respond to the challenges that COVID presents. So typically, especially with COVID, I think there's a common response, and definitely a very understandable response, is there's a lot of criticism, negative judgment, and blame. Things are really challenging right now. They're really difficult, and there's a tendency to, when we think about those things, we wish things could be different. We resist the way things are, and when we do that, I think that can have a really negative impact in terms, especially in regards to our mental health, and that's particularly the case when there are events are out of control. And COVID, unfortunately, is obviously a global event, but it's an event that's outside of our control. Me or you can't really, we're not gonna. We can't decide how long it's going to last. We don't get any control over whether there's going to be a vaccine. We don't get a control over the government's response. There's so many things involved with COVID that are just kind of placed upon us, and we have to deal with it. So when we have to deal with those things again, there's a tendency to be really critical of it, and to have those negative judgment towards that. And I think in these situations, when we're talking about things that are outside of our control, that it's really easy to get caught up in that. Sorry, that criticism and that blame. So again, it's trying to focus on events that we can control versus events that are out of our control. And for the events that are out of our control, the object is the strategy is to move towards acceptance of those events. So, for instance, when I talk to students, I talk to students a lot about trying to differentiate between events they can control and events they cannot control. And an example I give is controlling the weather. And we can't control the weather. And if there's a weather event that we don't want to have happen, we can't control the weather, but we have a choice in how we react to it. So if it's raining and you don't want it to rain, how do you deal with that? Do we just go outside and start stomping our feet and kind of huffing and puffing? Is that helpful? So obviously, I know that's not what we're dealing now is a little different than say a thunderstorm, but I think that the same approach can be made in terms of moving towards acceptance and trying to particularly when the event is out of our control. So acceptance is kind of I think maybe a loaded or at the very least a very misunderstood term. When I say we have to accept the way COVID is, we have to accept the constraints that are there. The distance learning, having to juggle all these things. I'm not suggesting that does not mean liking or approving of these experiences. I'm not. It's not necessarily a thing we want to have happen to us. I think that's true for the overwhelming majority of people. We don't want COVID to be here. We don't want to be dealing with this. But the fact of the matter is that it is here. So then we have the ability to we have the ability to choose how we relate to that. And again, acceptance is not doing nothing in the face of difficult challenges. We're not ignoring or dismissing uncomfortable emotions, whether that's frustration, anxiety, sadness, all sort of things that can typically cause some significant distress. But in terms of relating to COVID and self-care, we're talking about, instead of struggling against the things you cannot change, can there be a willingness? Sometimes I think willingness, and that's might be a better term to when you're experiencing unwanted events. If acceptance you find too passive, but it's a willingness to experience unwanted events, accepting things for what is, not how you want them to be. And what that allows you to do is it creates space to resolve issues, concerns that you do have control over. So what that entails with COVID is trying to, we don't have control over say distance learning, okay? But can you figure out ways to make it work, whether juggling different things around, communicating with the school team, trying to find things that work for you. So the main point of this slide is that the acceptance is not just saying, okay, whatever, this is happening to me. It's allowing the event to, for things to be as they are. So there's not that frustration, there's not that upset when you're resisting against something you can't change. Getting back to the weather analogy, we cannot change the rain, okay? It's just not going to happen, okay? So, but we have control over what we do when it rains. We have control if we go outside and put a rain jacket on. We get to control if we even go outside if it's raining. So those are the things that I'm talking about, and that we can bring over to what's going on with COVID. Figuring out what you can control. For the things you cannot control, allowing it to be there, and working on those things that you can control. So another way to look at it is the differentiation between pain and suffering. So if you, at first glance, you might think that, oh, there's not much difference between pain and suffering. But psychologically speaking, I think there's a significant difference. So pain, one way to look at pain is as something that's inevitable, and it is part of the human condition, and it's something that everyone goes through at some point in their life. There are painful experiences, and no matter how hard we might try, we're going to experience pain some level of pain on some level. So in talking about self-care and COVID, right now, pain can be considered the conditions imposed by COVID that we talked about earlier. All those things that, the challenges, the stressors, the things you're dealing with, that's pain. That's considered I use pain in quotes. Suffering is kind of the extra additional layer that we add on to the pain. And the suffering is how we relate to the conditions imposed by COVID. And getting back to what we control and what we cannot control, we can't necessarily control the pain, but we can control the suffering. So looking at this slide, that blue dot represents maybe the challenges inherent with COVID, all the things I've just talked about. And that extra green layer is that suffering that we possibly add on to it. And it's, like I said, it's understandable that it creates this frustration, or anxiety or angst. So I'm not saying, part of acceptance is acknowledging those internal feelings, acknowledging those internal thoughts, and that's part of where the acceptance comes in. But if you look at the difference between the circle on the left, if we can, and the circles on the right, if we can, if self-care to me is really about keeping the green circle as small as possible. Accepting the blue circle for what it is. It's here and it's not going anywhere. Not going anywhere at the moment. And the self-care comes in reducing the suffering, how we relate to it. Again, acknowledging the presence and just letting go of the struggle of wishing things to be different. So that's easier. That's easier said than done. I think what I'm talking about is kind of an ongoing process where it takes time, and this is a skill that you can build on. It's not an all or nothing thing. But again, the self-care comes in reducing that suffering. So I'm using a lot of analogies here. Here's another analogy that I think really speaks volumes to what I'm trying to get at. So obviously you have the woman on the left trying to drag that big old boulder up that steep hill. And she's obviously really struggling. She's looking down at the ground, not really having a good time. So in that picture, we're looking at the hill as what we are climbing in terms of dealing with COVID. And then if you look at the picture on the right, you can see a woman. I think it's a woman, but you can see somebody climbing a similar hill, climbing another mountain, and you can see that there's no boulder there. So we right now, again with the analogy, is we're climbing the mountain of Mount COVID. Right, we're climbing Mount COVID, and it's hard. It sucks sometimes, but that we're on this mountain, and right now we can't get off. So the choice we have again is how we relate to being on that mountain, and we can try and drag that boulder up the hill. We can wish things were different. We can fight against being in this situation, or we can allow things to be as they are, and drop the boulder. And if you notice, the picture on the right, that person has the ability to look at the sunset. That person has the ability to look at the view, and they're about to get to that steep part, and COVID. So it's gonna be a challenging time, but letting go of that struggle also allows her to enjoy the things that are joyful, that are she's able to experience that by not having to carry that boulder, which is impossible for the woman on the left. So the bottom line here is, I'm trying to shift our thinking of self-care. We talked earlier, like, yes, exercise and all that is important, but I think more importantly and more practical on a day-to-day basis, and something that's more feasible in these times, is working how to accept our pain while reducing our suffering. And again, that's learning to control our reactions to external and internal events outside of our control, and reducing your struggle, acknowledging our feelings. And I think that's really, really critical to being able to put yourself, the goal is to, I think for self-care, is to put yourself in a situation where you can, and we're going to get to this in not this slide, but the next slide, to put yourself in a situation where you can accomplish the things you want to, and live by your values. So taking a step back, we talked about dealing with things with outside of our control. Once we accept the things that are outside of our control, we can kind of shift then to, okay, what is in my control, and how do I deal with that? What is within my control? How can I affect change? What are the things within my control? So I'm going to talk more about particular the one with difficult events, and how I treat myself. And then this is also going to be a little bit of a series. So next month, we're going to talk about more of values-based living and how to act on your values. And I think that can also be done in the context of self-care. But we are going to, the point is, focusing on how we treat ourselves, how we respond to our emotions and feelings, and what I say and do, what I say and do to influence the future, because we don't always know, we don't have direct control over what happens in the future. So the next part of my presentation is going to focus on self-compassion. And this part of the presentation is a way to, again, it's giving ourselves the opportunity, giving ourselves the space to problem solve, and put ourselves in situations where we can do the things that are important to us. So here are a list of some thoughts, statements that you may have experienced. In my professional experience in working with parents with youth with autism and other special needs, I've experienced such a significant amount of self-blame, and some very just general, there's a lot of I should be doing more. There's a lot of I need to be perfect to accomplish anything. I should have done this. I should have done that. I did not respond well to this, and there's a lot of pressure that builds up and builds up. And you can see in a lot of these, you hear the word should. And when I say the word should, that in and of itself is, it entails that there's a criticism inherent in that word should. My child should be making more progress, therefore I did something wrong. And I think that happens so frequently, and that can be really impactful to one's mental health. So I think the question to ask yourself is, when you're thinking about your own behavior, when you're thinking about your own life and the challenges you're experiencing with your child, think about how that the frequency of the negative self-judgment, criticism, and blame impacts your role as a caregiver. Is it helpful? Because I would argue very, very strongly that it's not helpful. Not only is it not helpful, it's detrimental. And so to continue on the definition of how I define self-care, it's controlling how we respond to challenges, stressors, and unwanted events. But the goal is not necessarily to feel good. Okay, it's great if you're doing this and it makes you feel good, it makes you feel better. But the goal of I think in all of this is not necessarily to feel good. It's to live by your values based on what's important to you. And when I've talked to self-care about two parents with children with autism, sometimes or a lot of times it kind of goes in one ear, out the other, because there's such a focus on the needs of the child. So again, the reframing of self-care here is, yes, it's things you do to yourself, but it's also a way for, a way to frame it is caregiver sustaining actions. It what puts you in a position to do the things that are important to you. And that's, that can be a lot of different things. But I think the obvious one is being the best caregiver that you can be, being the best parent for your child that you can be. So where does self-compassion come in? It's pretty, the concept is, it's just how you treat yourself, what you say to yourself. And it's, I think it's not a, it's not, I don't think it's a very radical concept or idea, or complicated concept or idea, but it can be a very challenging one to enact. So, there's generally three components, and this is taken from, Kristen Neff, who's a self-compassion scholar and has a lot of literature on this, a lot of research on this. So I'm not making any of this up. This isn't my stuff, but I think what she talks about with self-compassion is extremely relevant for you all, as in pre-COVID as well as during COVID, and hopefully post-COVID when we get there. So and I'm going to explain a little bit about the self-compassion and the self-kindness, common humanity, mindfulness. But it's important, I think, to know that we're not talking about when we're talking about self-compassion, we're not talking about feeling sorry for ourselves. We're not talking about self-indulgence. And again, we're not talking about our self-esteem or feeling good. We're talking about how we treat ourselves and what we say to ourselves when we are experiencing pain or when we are experiencing suffering, and what we can say to ourselves to be compassionate in order to put us in a place, again, for the caregiving sustaining acts. So the first concept, self-kindness versus self-judgment. And self-kindness, I think it's in some ways it's self-explanatory, warm, understanding, and kind to ourselves when we fail to meet expectations or experience difficulties. And I think there's such a, we talked about these sort of statements, and inherent in these statements is so much criticism, judgment, and blame, and that can create a lot of angst, a lot of anxiousness, a lot of anxiety, frustration, disappointment, sadness, a lot of anxiety and depression. So when we're talking about self-kindness, it's the question to ask yourself is, would you treat a friend the way you treat yourself? And I would say 99% of the time, the way we treat ourselves is way, 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 way harsher than we would ever treat a friend or a loved one. And so that's kind of the question you can ask yourself. If you can, am I experiencing self-compassion? Is what I'm saying to myself something I would say to my friend? And when we're being extremely critical, you wouldn't go tell a friend, oh, you should be doing this better, or, oh, that's not good enough. So that's just generally the mind frame to kind of get yourself in when we're thinking about this self-compassion. And I have some examples of ways to demonstrate, the way this could play out. And it dovetails from the acceptance piece. This is really difficult right now, so I'm going to give myself a break. So this is really difficult right now. That's an acceptance right there. That's an acceptance piece that things are difficult. I think there's a tendency to say, oh, this isn't so bad, or I should be doing better, I should be feeling better, I'm a bad parent. But again, what does that do to our mental health? What does that do to our ability to do the responsibilities that are important to us? What does it do to our ability to be a caregiver? So the self-compassion comes in as, so I'm going to give myself a break. Okay. And I think there's a strong tendency. I know, personally, I've experienced that very, kind of that visceral, like, if I do that, I'm letting myself off the hook, so to speak. I need to be vigilant and make sure this doesn't happen again. But I've definitely evolved on that thinking, and have seen how, just like the acceptance piece gives you that space to sort of problem solve, being self-compassionate, having that self-kindness gives you that space to, deal with the situation that just happened, that you might not be thrilled about how you handled it. Could be a situation involving a behavioral outburst, and you feel like you reacted in a way that wasn't appropriate, or you feel like just that, you're not be living up to your responsibilities as well as you would like to. But the first part, this is really difficult right now, is that acceptance piece. And then the self-compassion comes in. I'm going to give myself a break, because that's going to allow you to be able to deal with that situation non-judgmentally, and then go ahead and put yourself in problem-solving mode for situations you can control. So the next statement is common humanity versus isolation. Again, in my experience, I think there's been I think parents with children with autism can often find themselves very, very isolated. They're experiencing things that their neighbors might not be, that the children if they're at a public school might not be experiencing, and it can be pretty isolating. And but I think it's, that common humanity piece is recognizing that you're not the only person that is experiencing difficulties right now. Of course, COVID's impacting everyone, but particularly parents of youth with special needs are all encountering similar challenges. So the difference, you can look at the differences in the two statements. This is really difficult right now. Again, the acceptance. You're allowing things to be difficult. You're not pushing it away. You're not resisting it. You don't like that it's difficult. I'd rather it not be difficult, but at the same time, it is difficult right now. And I know other people are going through similar experiences. So that's extremely different from, thinking no one knows how I feel right now, and I'm the only one in this position. That isolation, that thinking regarding isolation, I think, again, it creates that upset that adds to your struggle. It's kind of that suffering to the pain that you're already experiencing. So the self-compassion piece is, it's bringing down that suffering, not so you can feel good. All right, because feeling good is not necessarily the objective. The objective is to, again, lower the suffering so you can do the things that are important to you, and realizing that not only you're not the only one struggling. What the specific things that you are struggling with are, I'm willing to bet that people, there's people that are here that, got all of you listening to this, are experiencing some very similar challenges right now. And I think it's really, really important to keep that in mind, and that's a big part of the self-compassion. So the last piece, mindfulness versus over identification. Mindfulness is kind of another buzzword that I think is often overused and probably misunderstood at times. But we're talking about being aware of painful thoughts, feelings, and situations without having to define who you are. So can you mess up? Can you not do something perfectly? Can a situation happen that you didn't handle that well? Does that need to define who you are as a person? Does that need to define who you are as a parent? So on a personal note, this actually, I had gone through and written up the presentation, with very with self-care and self-compassion on my mind. And very recently, this weekend, I had an incident with my 3-year-old where she's been in this phase where she's just constantly screaming and yelling and really just so non-compliant. And I'm sitting here thinking like, I'm a school social worker. I deal with behavior problems. Like, why can't I control my child? And it went on and on. And there was one night she didn't sleep and she was screaming and yelling. It woke up the other kids. So nobody got any sleep. The next day it continued, and I completely lost it. And I screamed at her. Something I've really never done, and not something I would, it's not something I'm very proud of. So don't tell anyone, but um, it happened. And so, but then with this on my mind, I realized I had two choices. I could say to myself, I can't believe I yelled at her like that. I'm a terrible parent and I deserve to be punished, because that I handled that situation completely wrong. But I feel like that's gonna create that would create a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. And I actively chose. I was like, I felt horrible at first, but I said to myself, I wish I handled that situation differently, but I'm doing the best I can in challenging circumstances. It has been challenging, and I'm going to forgive myself for my mistake. I'm not happy about it. I wish if I had to choose, I would definitely choose for it not to happen. But I honestly think I'm now in a position. Before this all started, she was screaming and yelling and carrying on, but I feel like I can kind of have a sense of calm about it, because I'm learning from my mistake. I put myself in a position now where I'm able to handle it in the future, and I've actively been able to think about, like, if this happens, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z, and I'm able to deal with it in a better in a better way. So the point of self-compassion is again trying to treat yourself kindly, not because it's just the nice thing to do, although it is the nice thing to do for yourself, but it's because it puts you in a position where you're not carrying all that extra baggage around. And that extra baggage is that boulder, and it just weighs us down, and it becomes oppressive. And that boulder gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the self-compassion is making that boulder bigger, dropping the boulder, however you want to think of it. But that's the point. And there's been a lot of recent research on the general benefits, so you don't have to believe me, but there is research out there that you can see that it's really people that practice self-compassion increase motivation, more confidence, less fear of failure, more persistence, healthier behaviors. We talked about, of course we know we need to exercise, eat well, not drink so much. But this is a way to get to those other more stereotypical self-care behaviors. Positive psychological outcomes, negative association with depression. And there's also been studies done where its benefits are specific to parents of children with autism. More emotionally resilient, greater life satisfaction, greater sense of meaning and fulfillment, less despair, a safety net when setbacks occur, protection against rumination and self-criticism, and just being less overwhelmed and restricted by challenges of raising a child with autism. You don't need me to tell you that raising a child with autism is challenging. It's hard. But then when you add COVID and all that entails, the challenges feel might be exponential, and it might feel very overwhelming. So the key to what I'm talking about tonight is to reduce that sense of overwhelmedness, if that's a word. I'm making it a word if it's not, and is to you know, try and be accepting of things we can't change. Have a willingness to have those things be as they are, and be compassionate to yourself, because those things, I think, can, you know, when you think of it in the terms of self-care, it's taking care of yourself. So again, the term I've heard, I didn't come up with this, you know, is that caregiver sustaining. So you can do the caregiving sustaining activities. So self-compassion helps reduce the suffering. I cannot emphasize that enough. And I think so. Practically speaking, I have two challenges for you, because you can hear me talk and talk and talk and talk, and if it's you know, I want to make sure. My hope is, anyway, that you'll get something out of this, something you can take home with you, something you can practice, something you can work on. So my challenge to you, the first part has to do with acceptance. The second part has to do with self-compassion. And the first part is noticing a time you find yourself resisting something outside of your control. It can be COVID related or not, but really, you're starting to pay attention to how you're thinking, what your mood is. You're noticing notice how it impacts your mood and behavior. Can you come up with a script based on acceptance? We talked about some of those. Like, this is really you know, this is really challenging for me right now. Something along those lines. And notice when you use that acceptance language, notice how it impacts your mood and behavior. Notice how it impacts your ability as a caregiver. And what you're looking for, these I mentioned earlier, it's just not a all or nothing kind of thing. This is something that you start small with, and you build up and you build up and you build up. And it's, you know, you train your mind, you train your body on how to deal with these challenges. And so, but, you know, can you notice, you know, the key word there is notice. Start noticing how you're reacting to things outside of your control. Is there a sudden rush of you know, trying to not to want things to be differently, and see what you can do to kind of start shifting that. The same thing goes with the self-compassion. Can you notice a time you find yourself being critical of your parenting? Can you notice how it impacts your mood and behavior? Again, utilizing a script, using a self-compassion. How do you know, can you say something nice to yourself? What would you say to a friend in that situation? It's really, you know, it sounds simple, but I think it's hard to do, but you know, that is what we're talking about. What would I say to a friend in this situation? So utilizing a script, thinking about what you would say to a friend, notice how it impacts your mood and behavior, notice how it impacts your ability as a caregiver. So that's my challenge to you, and I'm hopeful that it's something, you know, you guys can again take home with and start working on, because I think it's really important now more than ever to be practicing these sort of things, because there is that blue circle of pain. You know, it's big right now, and unfortunately, it's not going away in the near future. So, you know, my point is hopefully not to sound too depressing and pessimistic, but what I'm saying is, you know, there are ways to deal with the pain, the pain there, and the way to do that is to initially to reduce that suffering, and that comes through self-care, taking care of ourselves in terms of how we react to situations, how we you know, whether we can be accepting of various things going on in our life, our thoughts, our mood, and can we be kind to ourselves? Can we be compassionate to ourselves when we don't meet our expectations? Can we be maybe not okay with meeting expectations, but do we have to beat ourselves up when we don't meet expectations? Do we have to blame ourselves? Do we have to feel the need to be punished? and I'm hopeful you guys can take some of this and use it in the coming weeks. So that's my presentation for tonight. Basically, this is all based on acceptance and commitment therapy. Some of the charts and quotes were taken from a book, Act Made Simple by Russ Harris. Here's the self-compassion website that you can look on. They have a lot of good exercises that you can do. They're not very time consuming. They have some meditations. Some people react negatively to that kind of the meditation, but I think it's it provides some good scripts in terms of how you can begin to kind of shift if you tend to be kind of harsh on yourself, how you can kind of start shifting to be more self-compassionate. And then the goal, the hope is next month we'll have another presentation on self-care, and this will take a little bit deeper dive. I talked earlier about, and I have talked throughout the presentation about I've alluded to anyway, living by your values. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about kind of actions you can take more fully based on what you can control. So again, I really appreciate you guys all coming out. It's been a pleasure being here with you all tonight, and I hope to continue the conversation next month. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mike. Oh, I'm not gonna. Is everybody muted? I'm gonna. Okay. I think I'm echoing, but that's okay. So I want to thank Mike for the presentation. It's very informative. Again, really thinking about how to reframe our thoughts and be kind to ourselves and making sure that we're talking positively to ourselves. Very important. In the link I put in this, or in the chat, I put in this link for feedback. We would love your feedback so that we can continue to make these presentations really catered to you and your needs. So please feel free, or please fill that out at your earliest convenience. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. We'll see you next month. Bye.